Thank you so much, and thank you, Bishop. It is a real privilege to be here with you today. Good morning to all of you. You know, I have the privilege of not just being here with you today, but with working with some of the congregations in your synod as part of a pilot project. So if you are part of that pilot project, just raise your hand so people around you know that you're involved in this. And I'm really grateful for some buttons that were made so you can find out who these people are that say, ask us about LEAD. So there you go. You can learn more if you're interested. There's also a brochure in your packet that will tell you a little bit more about LEAD. So as the bishop mentioned, LEAD is an outgrowth of the Gulf Coast Synod and the work we did there. But the decision to start LEAD was the decision to say that we believe leadership matters. In fact, we believe leadership is hope. And so this is an opportunity not just for one synod to get involved in this, but for synods, for leaders, for Christians all over the world to take seriously their leadership. Thank you for joining me in that today. As we meet together today, I want to share with you some of our best learnings. We've been at this for 4 years, and we're learning a lot as we go along. And so I hope that this will be helpful for you as you lead your congregation. I thought I would begin by introducing you to my cow. Her name is Martha, and yes, she has a sister named Mary. Isn't she fabulous? Don't you love her? Now, I know some of you are sitting there thinking, why are we talking about cows? But there are some people in the room who actually have cows. How many of you have cows? Okay, you're not telling. Some of you do. There we go. I see some hands. Excellent. So if you have cows, you know how important they are. But the rest of you are driving by cows on the side of the road every day, not giving them any attention because you feel like if you have seen one cow, you have seen them all. Am I right? Well, marketer Seth Godin tells us that, in fact, if Martha was purple or pink or turquoise or orange, that she, in fact, would be remarkable and you would notice her, right? She would be a remarkable cow. Remarkable means worthy of attention. If you haven't seen Seth's TED Talk on this, I encourage you to check it out. You know, not to exactly compare cows and congregations, but people are driving by our congregations every day, and they are not giving them any attention. And so I want to ask you today, what is it about your congregation that is remarkable? What is it that sets your congregation apart from the other congregations that are around it? You know, what is it that makes your congregation actually worthy of attention? This matters because you and I get to be leaders in a church in the time in which our world is changing faster than it has ever changed before. We'll talk a little bit more about that in my workshop. But as you already have heard here today, it is an exciting time to be in leadership in the church, and we believe that it is leadership that makes all the difference. Leadership is, in fact, hope. As we've been figuring this out with LEAD, we've realized that there are some things that you can do that will be behavior changes that will actually help your congregation shift to being what we think of as a remarkable congregation. And some of the big ideas I want to share with you now in this conversation this morning are ideas that have come to me while I was hiking the Inca Trail in Peru, heading to Cusco. So you'll get a little visit to Peru as we have, our conversation today. Hang on, there we go. There we go. Okay, so first big idea I want you to know about as we think about what it is to be a remarkable congregation in a changing world is that it is actually mind over matter. The way we think about what we do makes a huge difference. Now, I was preparing to hike the Inca Trail, and so I bought new hiking boots, and I walked for 6 months around my neighborhood in these hiking boots. I thought I was in pretty great shape. So imagine my surprise when I got to Cusco, and after acclimating, so I thought, for 4 days, we began to hike the Inca Trail. And I realized that actually I couldn't breathe. I am not kidding. My Gulf Coast lungs were feeling like they were crushing my body. I could hardly move forward. In fact, it was like I was making 3 or 4 steps at a time and having to stop so that our porter, and I'm not making this up, would go running past me and carrying on his back tents or chairs or pots and pans or food to provide for our needs. These guys were amazing. They were rock stars. Their calves were as big around as my waist. They were phenomenal. But I couldn't breathe. I could hardly do it. Now, I'm not saying that I was exactly panicking, but I knew I was past the point hiking the trail that I could turn around. Like there was no choice but to go forward. And so I slowly was walking forward, wondering if I was like the last one in our group, right? Because I felt very isolated and a little anxious. When Oswaldo, my guide, came alongside me, and he comes up beside me and he says, "Hey, you're looking good." I'm like, really? I just looked at him and I said, "I can't breathe." And he said, "Well, you have to get a rhythm." And I said, "Huh?" He said, a rhythm between movement and rest. How far can you walk before you have to stop to catch your breath? And then how long do you have to stop to catch your breath before you can begin to walk again? A rhythm of movement and rest, movement and rest. And off he went, I think, to rescue someone else. So I had no choice but to take him seriously. After all, he knew more than I did. And so I started paying attention to his advice. I recognized that I could walk 12 steps, yes, 12 steps, before I had to stop to breathe. 2 or 3 minutes there, I think. And then I would continue with my 12 steps. I got into this pattern of 12 steps forward, a little rest, 12 steps forward, a little rest. Pretty soon, it was really working, and I was making some progress. I realized after a while that I could stop counting, and I could start saying the Lord's Prayer. I could pray myself forward. So I would pray the Lord's Prayer and then stop and catch my breath and pray again. And friends, before I knew it, I had climbed the 14er that I was making myself up the mountain on. It was amazing. And as I was praying, I realized that I could actually enjoy the Andes. Aren't they fabulous? But until I had this advice from Oswaldo, quite honestly, I didn't care where I was. I was so anxious. But then I realized upon reflection that the only thing that had changed between my beginning that morning on this climb and actually getting to the summit was the way I was thinking about it. I was in no better shape. My boots were in no better broken in. I had no different equipment. It was still just me, but my frame of mind had changed. And that switch did not come from inside of me. See, I needed someone from outside to come alongside and give me a new vision, to give me some patterns, to teach me some behavior so that I could move forward. And without that advice, who knows, maybe I would still be out there, trying to figure out how to move forward. The truth is I was thinking myself in a panic. In many ways, exactly like I see leaders in our church thinking themselves into a panic today. So I believe that it is indeed mind over matter. Don't you love this picture of Rebecca? She's fabulous, one of the students on our trip. Well, Carol DeWitt has done some amazing work on this concept of mindset. And she tells us, in fact, that people have 2 mindsets. People have a mindset. Everyone has a mindset, and there are 2 different kinds of mindsets. There is a growth mindset. That is a mindset that means I can take things on and will try and take risks. But their other mindset is called a fixed mindset. You can read about this in her book. But the good news is, people with a fixed mindset have the capacity to switch to a growth mindset. Now, just take a little personal check on this for yourself. Do you feel like you are more of a growth or a fixed mindset person? Because I guarantee you, when I was hiking the Andes, I moved into a fixed mindset until I got some outside support. It's true. So as we have begun working with LEAD, we've been listening to leaders all over the country. I'm over 420 pastors listening to one-on-one. I've been listening to lay leaders, quite a few more than that. And today I want to do a little learning from you as we go along. As I've been listening to leaders, we have realized that we can group leaders into 4 categories. We have leaders who are growing, taking chances, trying new things. We have leaders who are out of breath, really like I was in hiking the Inca Trail. And we have those who are stalled, looking more to the past than to the future. And we have leaders who are becoming, people who are growing in their leadership. I wonder where you see yourself in this quadrant. This is a grid that is actually a quadrant. Because as you notice, up at the top, we have the words deep, bold, consequential faith in Jesus Christ. By the way, that's Lead's mission statement. And at the bottom, we have a complacent faith in Jesus Christ. Now, please don't think I'm judging people's faith life. I'm not. But what I am is noticing and listening to and discovering a movement of faith, a way in which we practice our faith. And there is a difference. And then on one side of this grid, you see the word innovation. These are folks that are experimenting, that are taking risks, that are trying new things. And on the other side, you see cautious. These are people who are playing it safe. Now, as you see, the lines on this chart are really dotted lines because it's not as hard lined between these as you can imagine. Most people fall somewhere in the middle of some of this. But in fact, we have a tendency to fall in one or the other. So just to unpack this with you for a little bit. Leaders who are growing. These are leaders who are leading to learn. Everything that they're doing is part of their research. So as they are leading, they're asking themselves questions, constantly evaluating and wondering. They're highly committed to personal growth and personal development. By the way, they're taking their continuing ed. They are intentionally growing people of all ages. So they're not just leading themselves, they're investing in others. They're taking risks, they're innovating, and they're discerning God's vision all the time. Their leadership style, we call it casting vision. Then we have those who are out of breath. Friends, this is where I see most of the leaders, not just me in Peru, but most of the leaders in our congregations. And I'm not talking just about our rostered leaders. These are our lay leaders as well. We are learning to lead. And you can ask yourself, why are we just now learning to lead? Well, we're learning to lead because the landscape around us has changed. And the ways in which we have learned to lead in the past and the things that have served us well and have been successful aren't working as well as they used to. We know it in our gut. We feel it. We don't always know exactly what to do about it. These folks are often very tired, overworked, and indecisive. And it's not that they don't care or they aren't trying. They're experiencing spiritual exhaustion. Many of them have been kind of through it, if you know what I mean, in their congregation or in their work life or in their family life. I call this leadership style consensus building. Now, consensus building is a fantastic leadership style if you are in the midst of serious anxiety, crisis, and conflict in a congregation. But as a way of an ongoing decision-making style, consensus will wear you out. If we have to get everyone to agree before we can make any decision to move forward, by the time we make that decision, nobody cares anymore, and we're exhausted. Whoops. So the next leadership style I want to introduce to you is stalled. A lot of times, these are folks who are done learning. They already think they know everything. They often are ignoring statistics. And frankly, they're resisting the change that's going on around us, which is unstoppable. We can't stop these changes, friends. They are happening to us, not because of us, but we will be caught up in them. So we have an opportunity to participate. Our stalled leaders are definitely folks who are looking more to the past, and you'll hear it when they have reflection and they wish we were the church we used to be at some other time in history. Their leadership style may actually be authoritative, one of the least effective leadership styles today. And then we have the becoming leaders. These are people who are just now growing and becoming leaders, either in their congregations, in their neighborhoods, and in the world. some of these are spiritual but not religious people. They may be new to leadership due to a life stage. So this is our campus ministry. This is our outdoor ministry students or our youth that we're mentoring into leadership. But it is also our newly retired people who have tons of gifts and capacity, who are loaded with, our congregations are loaded with these people who now all of a sudden have freedom in their lives to use what they learned in the marketplace as part of participating in God's mission in a changing world, and they are amazing. I think of their leadership style as networking, and they're networking over a cup of coffee or on social media, but either way, they're connecting with one another, and they are becoming the leaders of our churches or of our world. Now, you have in front of you a feedback card. It may not be green, but you've got a feedback card. It'll have a little lead logo on it. And I want to ask you if you'll just make a little check on there on where you see yourself. This should be sitting on your table, not in your packet. So it's just sitting in front of you. And I'd love you to be part of our lead research by just checking where you are. And we're going to work through this card for the rest of our time together. I do want to have a disclaimer. I'd love your name on the card. If you choose to give me your email address, I'm going to add you to our newsletter, okay? So if you don't want to be added, don't give it to me. That's the disclaimer. So just take a quick second and check where you are. Are you growing, out of breath, stalled, or becoming? If you don't want anyone to know who you are, you don't have to put your name on it. That's just fine. All right, you got it? So the second thing I learned while hiking the Inca Trail is this. All perception is biased. Our assumptions actually may be working against us. And yes, we do have assumptions. So as I was hiking and preparing for the hike, I had in my head how I thought this would work out. You know, I'm the group leader, and I looked at the group. We had 22 people. 14 of them were from one congregation. I expected that group to be like a little clique among the rest of us, to be like an insular subgroup. I'd seen this before. But as it turns out, I was dead wrong. They didn't behave that way at all. I also knew that we had several different generations of people with us. And I thought for sure that the students in our group would group together, and the adults, older folks like myself and older, we would hang out together. Well, I was wrong again. And then I thought that possibly we would have a completely different way of being with those of us in our group and our Peruvian brothers and sisters who are accompanying us on this hike. Wrong again. As it turns out, hiking the Inca Trail is so hard that we have to all work together. And we overcame every single one of those biases that I went into this expecting to have. I was dead wrong. So it turns out my guide was making his way around. And as we hiked, I could tell on that third day who was hiking behind me or in front of me by their rhythm. Every one of us had a different sound with our poles and our boots hitting the ground. We had a different rhythm. You could have actually lined us up by our age to find out how fast we hiked. So the youngest, Peter, who was 12 years old, was always way ahead of the rest of the group. And the beautiful German couple who were in their mid-70s always left earlier than the rest of us in the morning and came in after dark. They were phenomenal. But boy, there was as much respect in our group for Peter as there was for this couple, who taught us so much about perseverance and about what it means to actually be able to do hard things in spite of the environment around us. They were terrific. These assumptions that we all have, the categories and the groups that we put people in, are working against us. So the leadership tip here is to get out of your comfort zone. We have to experience different communities. This is where our global mission partners or where our ecumenical partners can teach us so much about what God is doing in the world around us. You know, this isn't just a new idea. Actually, the Apostle Paul was teaching this to the church in Philippi when he says in Philippians 2, and I'm just going to read a piece of this right in the middle, where he says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves." That's huge, isn't it? Regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to your own interest, but to the interest of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. And he goes on. I think that's very helpful words for a church that has to say we have to get over our biases. The isms that are going on in our world are working against us, and there is no place for this kind of sexism, racism, genderism, any kind of ism you can think about in a Christian leader. We have to be, in fact, confronting our own biases so that we can lead others through it. See, there's this in-group bias where we perceive people who are like us, whether it's the color of our skin, their religion, their socioeconomic status, whatever it is, more positively. And we perceive people who are different from us more negatively. We feel that we can't trust them. This is not working for us. And as leaders, we have to be aware that this bias is a framing effect that actually influences how we make changes and how new changes are perceived when we do make those changes in our congregations. It's just really important, friends, that we take a hard look at this and that we wonder about our own biases and imagine what they are. Now, I feel like we can think about each of our congregations, not just ourselves, when we look at this grid that you see on the screen. So we have congregations that are growing. We have congregations that are out of breath. We have congregations that are stalled, and we have some that are becoming. I wonder where your congregation is on this. Now, you can judge yourself pretty well, but what we've found is if you have an opinion about your congregation, well, that's just one person's opinion. And so it's helpful for a congregation to take an assessment. Lead has put this assessment together. It's digital. It's 15 minutes of your time. It's 20 questions. And it will place you here on what we call the leadership landscape. You will know where your congregation scores. Now, our assessment doesn't actually measure everything. It only measures 4 things within that landscape. So you're placing 4 things on this grid right here. The lead assessment will take a look at how well is your congregation listening? How is your congregation centered? How is it exploring, and how is it connecting? What we've done in our research is discover there are many, many things a congregation can do to move from whether it's stalled or out of breath to becoming or growing. In fact, my first list had 44 things, no kidding. But no one can remember that, and we certainly can't do it. And so we've honed it down to these 4 behaviors. I think behaviors are really important. They are what we do. So think about organizations that are amazing at culture change. Can you think of some? So what came to mind for us as we were looking at this, frankly, are some of the organizations that are renowned for their way of changing behavior. That would be AA, which changes people's behavior, and looking at the best organization for behavior change, and that would be Weight Watchers. Did you guess it? So they have specific things that make a difference in people's lives, but as you know, you can join AA and eat cheesecake every night and not hit your goal, right? Well, that's what a behavior change is about, is actually doing something different. And that's what LEAD's 4 growth indicators for vital behaviors are that you see on the screen. So let me just show you a little bit about how that works. Congregations, if you can see across the top of this chart, some are growing, out of breath, stalled, and becoming, just across the top. And on the left, you'll see our growth indicators. And I just want to unpack a few of these for you. A congregation that is listening to God in Scripture and prayer, listening to God in the congregation, and listening to God in the neighborhood are doing these things. Growing congregations are engaged in their neighborhood. They're doing justice, both locally and globally. And if you ask people in their neighborhood something about who they are, the neighborhood will have an answer, trust me, because I've done this listening. Out-of-breath congregations are disconnected from their neighborhood. They are hosting groups often. They might be hosting the Scouts, or they've got an AA group there, or other organizations. They're great landlords, but they have no relationship with those people. So basically, it's not a ministry so much as a little business. Congregations that are stalled, they are member-centric with very little value added to their neighborhoods. And then those that are becoming are learning to be community-centric. They are beginning to see the problems in their neighborhood, but they're not quite sure yet how to respond. LEAD has a process that helps the congregations make their way through this to become better listeners. We think this is the most important step a congregation can take, is to pay attention to its neighborhood. We call this the tune-in process. And you can ask some of the people with these buttons, because they're participating in this, on how it's going in their congregation as they're becoming better listeners. We also know that being centered matters, another one of our growth indicators. So growing congregations have an aligned, clear purpose and values. Actually, we think there are 3 different kinds of values operating in any given congregation. I could talk with you more about that. And we believe that they are paying attention to deepening the faith of their folks through excellent preaching, teaching, and music. Out-of-breath congregations, they have a very unclear and very disconnected sense of purpose. So a purpose is different than a mission statement. A purpose is answering the question, why do we exist? And be able to answer that question. Our out-of-breath congregations often have pretty unpredictable quality when it comes to their teaching, their worship, their music. Our stalled congregations, they are inward. Their purpose is inward. It's focused on themselves. And their values were established years ago and not revisited. Their worship and music are weak and, frankly, are probably frustrating to a lot of the people who visit there or people who are new to the faith. Becoming congregations are discovering their purpose and values. They are working on indigenous faith practices. They're working on inspiring worship and in preaching. Can you see the difference across the spectrums on how different congregations are practicing these behaviors? Just to look at a few more, and I won't read all of these, but let's look at explore. The behavior exploring is the behavior of asking hard questions, of saying, why are we doing this? Should we keep doing this? Is this the right thing for us to do? It's taking a look at our own theology, once again, and digging more deeply into that. It is paying attention to our governance. I never thought I would care about governance, but governance, as it turns out, is pretty important. And it is taking a look at our staffing and our stewardship and our generosity. So growing congregations have a vision that inspires leaders and generosity. They have a staff and leaders that are always asking questions, always experimenting, being willing to make changes, and they have a governance that frees new things to happen. An out-of-breath congregation, their finances actually lead their vision. You see the difference? And the staff is usually over-functioning with very little continuing ed, or continuing ed that they go to but they never can bring back and apply in the congregation. But stalled congregations, actually the finances stop the vision. So the predominant question is, can we afford it? And that usually stops them from trying anything new. A becoming congregation, the vision actually leads the finances, and actually they never have enough money. They're short on funds. They like to get partners, but they're working out of their passions and usually have a lot of volunteer engagement. Now, the truth is, I wanted you to see that each one of these different kinds of congregations feels like money is a problem, right? Do you see that? No one in the church has enough money to do their ministry. The question is not, do we have enough money, but how are we thinking about it? Again, mind over matter. How are we thinking about this money? Because we know that churches that are remarkable, that are worthy of attention, are thinking about their finances in such a way that it encourages people to take risks and to try new things. So I could tell you a lot of stories about congregations that are doing these things well and that are working on these different growth indicators that I've just introduced to you. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to share one. And it happens to be from my home congregation, Faith Lutheran Church in Bel Air, Texas. I'm not sure they know I talk about them like this, so it's just between us. Faith Lutheran Church, actually, about 15 years ago, was a stalled congregation. There was so much conflict and turmoil in this congregation that at one point, even a member of the congregation was suing the pastor. I mean, it was dark. It was like not a place you want to invite your friends. And so that pastor ultimately left, really had no choice. And then an interim pastor came. Now, for my money, that interim pastor stayed too long, but it provided a beautiful opportunity for the congregation to calm down and to reevaluate itself. Now, because I'm a member of this congregation, they said, all right, let's do this tune-in process that Peggy is teaching, and they took it seriously. They put together a tune-in team, a listening team, but they began with their biases. Because they know the demographics of Texas, 70% of people in Texas are under age 21 or Latino. They made the assumption that they would be calling a new pastor or associate pastor who was a Spanish-speaking pastor. They figured for sure that was the way it would be. In fact, so much so, people sort of got in love with the idea of calling a Spanish-speaking pastor. But they began to do this listening out in the neighborhood. They went to the local elementary school. And as they were listening at the local elementary school nearest them, they discovered that that neighborhood, to their surprise, was filled with Mandarin Chinese-speaking people. In fact, the school nearest them was about to become a magnet school where the education would be in Mandarin Chinese. They were the exception to the rule in Texas, but they almost missed it had they not listened. Interestingly enough, I think if they'd have looked at the faces of the children in the preschool, they might have caught that. But they didn't. I don't know why. You know, sometimes we miss the obvious. Well, they called a new pastor, and he ultimately went to work looking for a pastor in the ELCA who spoke Mandarin Chinese. Turns out there's only one, and he was in North Dakota. Long story short, yeah. I know. Long story short, we now have Pastor Tan as our pastor, a second pastor on our staff in our congregation. Just to try to test the waters of this, the congregation decided about 4 years ago to have a Chinese New Year celebration. They prepared for about 100 people, thinking some from the congregation would come, some from the neighborhood. Friends, they had 700 people show up at their Chinese New Year celebration. This was on the first crack at it. They were blown away at how many people responded. It was huge. Since then, this congregation has changed its worship times, a sure way to aggravate everyone, right? They have changed their worship times so that they do not have a Chinese ghetto. In fact, they've changed it so that the congregations can worship and learn together. And I have to say, it took some getting used to for all of us, but it was the right decision. And everybody did it because they believed in why we were doing it. See, they understood the clear purpose and clear value of that congregation doing that. I'm really proud to say that since then, I've had 2 of my grandchildren baptized in a bilingual services, English and Mandarin Chinese. Now, I think that's a beautiful way to come into the faith when you look at the way the world is changing around us. And I'm grateful that my family got to personally be impacted by this opportunity. But they would have completely missed this had they not done that listening. So take a second on your check-in card and mark where you think your congregation is. And as you look at that, I want to ask you I want to make you aware of a list that is on the back of your card. We don't have time to complete this, but maybe during the break you would be willing to do this for me. The back of the card is showing different ways in which we measure. See, I think the metrics of how many people are in worship and how much money they're giving are not enough metrics. I think they're never going to help us be the church we need to be. So you can be part of my research by just checking off which metrics you think churches should be using, or give me some other ones in case we missed them. I would love your help with that. So just take a quick second to fill this out. Third thing I have learned while hiking the Inca Trail, and the last thing I'm going to share with you today, is that it really is only one step at a time. It really is. I just had to show you this picture, the before and after shot, so you can see I really didn't make it. So as we were hiking on that last day, every turn we made, I could see Machu Picchu coming into vision. I could see where I was headed becoming clearer and clearer each step of the way. And it was a little emotional, I have to admit. It was like if I thought we'd never get there, and all of a sudden the end came a little too quickly. It was fabulous. I love this shot of Lizzie, who is wearing her Luther shirt as she proudly, I don't know how she could get her feet off the ground, but she did this jump on the 4th day. She was so excited to be there. I could hardly move. But it was a fabulous experience. See, it really was only one step at a time to make our way through what was a very difficult journey. And I think it's exactly like that when we move from being one of those congregations that people are driving by to becoming worthy of attention, to becoming a congregation that is actually remarkable. There are other questions on your check-in card. If you have the opportunity and have the heart to help us with our research, I would welcome you taking some time to fill those out. Included in there is a checkbox if you would like to be involved and would like Lead to support you. Now, we have been having this fabulous research project with the congregations that are part of our pilot here, and we'll talk more about this in our workshop later. But in fact, we start another cohort of congregations who will be doing this, and the commitment date is July 1. So I'm here for the duration of your assembly if you want to talk to me more about that or talk to others, because we would love your congregation to participate in this. And I want to close by saying to you, welcome to the Sacred Valley. You know, the Sacred Valley is what this place in Peru is called. But I believe it is also this time in which you and I get to be leaders in our church. We are at a time between the past and the future. We're in this valley, but God is in the midst of this, and you know from the Psalms where God is in the valley, right there with you, right? And so we can have the confidence, I believe, to make our way forward through this time. So welcome to Lead, and I wanted to close, actually, went a little far. Wanted to close with a word of prayer. Well, maybe I'll just leave that right there. Please pray with me. Gracious God, we feel you're calling us and stirring our hearts and our minds and our souls in new ways in this changing world. Give us the courage, Lord, to take on this growth mindset, to hear the voices of guides and others who will come beside us, who will help us make our way forward. Give us the confidence to be your church in this time. Help us to lean in to the rhythms that we have, our own theology, our way of blessing the world with your grace. And help us to remember that you are always ahead of us, going ahead of us, making the way. Lord, we pray for the leaders, those in this room and those in our congregations and those that haven't grown yet, that you pour your Spirit out on each one of them and help them to hear your voice so that they can stay the course and lead us into the future. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Thank you.